that's what hurt the most. Not the words themselves, "I miss her sometimes," but the ease with which they slipped out of his mouth, like they had no weight. We were sitting at the kitchen table. Morning light spilled through the curtains, soft and golden, landing on the half-empty cups of coffee between us. He was scrolling through his phone, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. I remember the smell of toast, slightly burnt, the way he liked it. I was buttering mine when he said it. And for a moment, I thought I'd misheard. "Who?" I asked, though deep down I already knew. He didn't even look up. "Clara," he said. "Sometimes I miss her. Just, who she was, you know? Before everything got complicated." The knife slipped in my hand. Butter smeared across the plate, uneven and messy. My throat felt dry. "Oh," was all I could say. He finally looked at me, noticing the change in my expression. His eyes softened, that practiced empathy of his flickering across his face. "Hey, don't look like that. It's not what you think. I love you, you know that. It's just memory. Nostalgia. Everyone does it." I nodded, because that's what I'd trained myself to do in moments like this, when something cut deep but I wasn't ready to bleed in front of him. The air in that small kitchen grew heavy. The sound of the clock ticking on the wall suddenly seemed louder than it should have been. He went back to scrolling. And I went back to pretending. We'd been married for 8 years. The kind of marriage that looks steady from the outside, two people who've built a life, routines, shared passwords, and grocery lists. But from the inside, it had started to feel like an echo of something that used to be alive. I used to blame time. Or maybe comfort. But that morning, staring at his calm face while he reminisced about his ex, I realized it wasn't just time. It was him. Something in him was still living in the past, and I was the one paying rent for it. That night, as I folded laundry, I thought about Clara. I'd never met her, not really. Just seen glimpses, old photos on his Facebook, the stories he told early in our relationship when he thought it was charming to share his heartbreaks. They'd dated for 3 years in college. She was, as he once said, the first woman who really knew him. I used to listen to those stories with patience, curiosity even. But now, they felt like small knives lodged between the folds of our marriage. I lay awake that night beside him, listening to the soft rhythm of his breathing. Every exhale felt like a ghost whispering between us. Before it all began, before his words cracked something in me, our life was simple. I worked as a librarian at the town's small public library. I loved the quiet there, the smell of old paper and coffee, the way regulars greeted me by name. David worked in marketing, the kind of job that made him talk fast and check his phone too often. Evenings were our time. We'd cook dinner together, talk about our days, sometimes watch old movies. Nothing grand. But it was ours. There was comfort in that rhythm. At least, that's what I used to think. He had this way of laughing when he was relaxed, the kind of laugh that started deep and ended in a little sigh. It was my favorite sound in the world. But lately, it had grown rare. I noticed he'd stopped laughing at the things I said. Stopped reaching for my hand when we walked down the street. Stopped noticing when I got a haircut, or wore that perfume he once said made him dizzy. Small things. Tiny fractures. But love doesn't break all at once. It erodes quietly, like cliffs under the sea. The morning after his confession, I went to work pretending everything was fine. But every word I shelved, every book I touched, every whisper of paper reminded me of what he'd said. "I miss her sometimes." Those 4 words echoed through my mind like a curse. At lunch, my colleague Emma noticed my silence. "You okay?" she asked, unwrapping her sandwich. "Yeah," I lied. "Just didn't sleep well." She nodded, but her eyes lingered. Emma was sharp, the kind of woman who saw between the lines. "You know," she said slowly, "sometimes men say things like that just to test you. To see how far they can go without consequence." Her words stung. Maybe because they sounded true. That night, when I got home, I found David in the living room, laughing at something on his phone. When he saw me, he quickly locked it and smiled, a reflex more than warmth. "Hey, babe. How was work?" I watched him carefully. "Fine," I said. "Who were you talking to?" He shrugged. "Just Tom from the office." His voice was smooth, practiced. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But something inside me, that quiet, feminine instinct that wakes before reason does, whispered, he's lying. Later that week, he came home late. The excuse was another client dinner. I told myself not to check his phone when he fell asleep, not to dig, not to spiral. But curiosity is a slow poison. It starts with just one look. When he finally drifted off, I reached for his phone, my hands trembling. He'd changed his password. That's when I knew. I didn't cry. Not that night. Instead, I stared at the ceiling and thought about all the ways women learn to swallow pain, quietly, gracefully, as if dignity depended on silence. But I wasn't sure I wanted to be quiet anymore. Because if my husband could miss his ex, maybe it was time I remembered what it felt like to be missed too. The following weekend, David suggested we drive out to the lake, the one where we used to go during our first year of marriage. He said he needed a breather, that things had been hectic at work. I agreed. Maybe I still wanted to believe him. Maybe I was clinging to the memory of who we used to be. The drive was quiet. The kind of quiet that hums beneath the sound of tires on asphalt. I watched the trees blur past my window while he hummed along to a playlist he'd made years ago. Halfway through, I noticed something. One of the songs, her song, was playing. He used to tell me Clara loved that track, how it reminded him of the night they first met at a college party. My fingers tightened around the seatbelt. He didn't even notice. I stared at his profile, the relaxed jaw, the faint curve of a smile. It was like watching a stranger wearing my husband's face. At the lake, everything looked the same, the wooden dock, the faded blue rowboats, the smell of pine and damp soil. He sat beside me on the dock, skipping stones across the water. I tried to join in, to match his rhythm, but something in me had shifted. He looked peaceful. I looked at him and wondered who he was thinking about. "Do you ever miss the old days?" he asked suddenly, eyes still on the water. "The old days?" I repeated. "Yeah. You know, before everything got routine." I forced a smile. "I think everyone does." He nodded slowly. "Clara used to say." He stopped mid-sentence, realizing too late. "Used to say what?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Nothing. Forget it." But I didn't forget it. That night, after we drove home, he showered and went straight to bed. I sat in the living room with the lights off, just the hum of the fridge and the faint tick of the wall clock filling the silence. I thought about all the ways people keep secrets, not in lies, but in omissions, in pauses, in the things they almost say. When I finally joined him in bed, I could smell a faint trace of perfume on his shirt, one that wasn't mine. It wasn't strong, just a hint of floral sweetness, like jasmine and something powdery. I closed my eyes. My heart thudded against my ribs like a warning. Days passed. He became more distracted, checking his phone more, stepping outside to take calls, coming home later than usual. One evening, he mentioned he'd been helping a coworker with a project. Her name slipped out, Clara. He froze the moment he said it. My fork clattered onto the plate. "Clara?" He blinked fast. "No," I said, "Cara. Cara." New in turn. But his eyes told a different story. I didn't argue. I just smiled faintly, pretending to believe him. Because something inside me had shifted again, from hurt to curiosity. I wanted to know how deep the rabbit hole went. So, I began observing. Quietly. He changed his phone wallpaper. He claimed it was a nature shot, but the colors, muted beige and blush, reminded me of her old Instagram aesthetic. He started wearing cologne again, the one he hadn't touched in years. The same one I bought him for our second anniversary, after he said it was her favorite scent. The final straw came one Sunday morning. He was in the shower, his phone buzzing on the nightstand. I glanced at it, not intending to snoop, but curiosity can be a reflex. The screen lit up with a notification. Clara Redheart, can't wait to see you again. My stomach dropped. I stood there frozen, the sound of running water echoing in my ears. There it was, confirmation. The ghost had become flesh again. I didn't scream. Didn't throw things or wake him up with accusations. Instead, I took a breath. A long, steady one. And for the first time, I realized something important: I wasn't helpless. I had a choice. That night, I stood at the kitchen sink washing dishes. The warm water ran over my hands, the smell of lemon soap filling the air. David walked in, humming, his hair still damp from his shower. He wrapped his arms around me from behind. I felt his breath against my neck, the same closeness that used to make my heart flutter. But now, it made me cold. "What's on your mind?" he asked softly. I forced a small smile. "Nothing much. Just thinking about old times." He chuckled. "You're getting nostalgic too, huh?" "Yeah," I said, turning off the tap. "Maybe I am." He kissed my shoulder, not noticing the sharpness beneath my tone. That was the moment the idea planted itself, quiet and poisonous. If he could miss his ex, maybe it was time I revisited a few ghosts of my own. The next day, I texted someone I hadn't spoken to in years. His name was Ethan. We dated briefly before David, before life got serious, before marriage became a word I built my world around. Ethan had been kind, funny, and uncomplicated. We'd ended things because we wanted different futures, but he'd always said, "You'll always be the one that got away." I didn't plan on anything reckless. I just wanted to see how it felt to be remembered. He replied almost instantly. "Ethan, wow, after all these years. You okay?" "Me, yeah. Just saw something that reminded me of you." "Ethan, still making people jealous, huh?" I smiled, not because of him, but because of the irony. For once, it wasn't me being forgotten. That night, I lay beside David, watching the faint light of his phone screen flicker against his face. He smiled at something, probably her. I turned to face the ceiling and whispered to myself, "Two can play that game. Not out of vengeance. Not yet. But because I needed to remember who I was before I became the woman who just sat quietly and hurt. And maybe, just maybe, he needed to see what it felt like when the one you take for granted suddenly remembers her worth." The following week, something inside me shifted completely. I stopped waiting for explanations. I stopped making excuses for the man I once believed would never lie to me. Instead, I started watching him, not like a paranoid wife, but like a detective who already knew the answer and just needed the proof. On Wednesday, he claimed he had a late client dinner. It was the same line he'd been using for months. But this time, I didn't just sit home wondering. When he left, I waited 15 minutes, then followed. I told myself it wasn't about revenge, it was about truth. About finally knowing what I'd been sleeping next to. The air outside was cool, tinged with the smell of rain and pavement. His taillights disappeared down the street, and I followed slowly, my heart thudding in rhythm with the wipers. He drove across town, past the restaurants he usually mentioned, past his office district. He pulled into a quiet neighborhood, where the houses looked like memories, old, charming, full of secrets. I parked a few blocks away and watched. He got out, adjusted his jacket, then walked up to a small white house with a porch light still on. The door opened. And there she was. Clara. I didn't need an introduction. I recognized her instantly, the woman from the photos, the soft curls, the familiar perfume that had clung to his shirt. She smiled when she saw him. That tender, too familiar kind of smile that no coworker gives. He reached out and brushed a strand of her hair behind her ear. And I swear, in that moment, I felt something hollow out inside me. 8 years of love, dissolved in the space between his fingertips and her cheek. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I didn't cry. Not yet. I just watched them walk inside, watched the porch light flicker, watched everything I thought was real turn into a story I no longer belonged to. The clock on my dashboard ticked past 9, then 10. When I finally started the car again, my hands were trembling so badly that I had to pull over twice. Back home, I sat at the kitchen table, the same spot where he'd told me he missed her, and stared at his empty coffee mug. I wanted to scream. To throw it. To make something, anything, break the silence that was swallowing me whole. Instead, I whispered, "You wanted her? You can have her." But not before I had something to say about it. The next morning, David acted like everything was fine. He came in humming, kissed my cheek, poured himself coffee. "Morning," he said cheerfully. "You're up early." I studied him. The calmness. The ease. The man who'd spent last night in another woman's house now standing in front of me, asking if I wanted toast. I almost laughed. "Yeah," I said softly. "Couldn't sleep." He nodded absently, scrolling through his phone. I watched him for a moment longer, then said, "I've been thinking, maybe we should take a short trip. Just the two of us. Reconnect." He looked up, surprised but pleased. "Really? That'd be nice." His smile was genuine. That was the worst part, how easily he could shift from lover to liar. That afternoon, I met Ethan for coffee. We hadn't seen each other in years, but sitting across from him felt strangely familiar, safe, even. He noticed immediately that something was wrong. "You look like you're holding something in," he said gently. I stirred my drink, watching the cream swirl into the dark liquid. "It's complicated." "David," he guessed. I smiled sadly. "You always were too perceptive." Ethan leaned in. "What did he do?" I hesitated, but the words came out anyway, quiet, raw, trembling. "He's seeing someone. His ex." Ethan's expression darkened. "And you're still there?" "I don't know why," I admitted. "Maybe because I need to see how far he'll go. Or maybe because I'm not done being the one who gets hurt." He reached out, placing his hand over mine. It wasn't romantic, it was grounding. "You deserve better," he said simply. Something about those words, the sincerity in his tone, cracked me. For the first time in weeks, I felt the sting of tears. When I got home that evening, David was already there. He looked up from the couch, smiling. "Hey, where were you?" "Just coffee with a friend," I said. He frowned slightly. "Friend?" "Yes, Ethan. Remember him?" His face changed, a flicker of discomfort, then composure. "Oh. Him. From before." I said casually, hanging up my coat. "It was nice catching up." "He's doing well." For the first time, he looked uneasy. I could almost see the gears turning in his head, the same kind of unease I'd been drowning in for weeks. I didn't smile. I just met his gaze and said softly, "Feels strange, doesn't it? Wondering who someone's really with when they say they're having coffee." He blinked. "What's that supposed to mean?" I shrugged. "Nothing. Just thinking out loud." Then I walked past him and left him sitting there, speechless. That night, he didn't touch his phone. He kept glancing at me, as if trying to read my mind. I said nothing. Silence can be louder than any confrontation. By morning, he was different, overly attentive, overly kind. He made me breakfast, kissed me twice before leaving for work. And yet, when he thought I wasn't looking, I saw him check his phone again, saw that flicker of guilt pass through his eyes. The performance had begun. But he didn't realize I already knew the entire script. That evening, I called Clara. I'd found her number easily enough, a quick search through the alumni page of their old university. When she answered, her voice was soft, almost uncertain. "Hello?" "Hi," I said calmly. "This is David's wife." There was silence, the kind that stretches like glass, thin and fragile. Then she said quietly, "I was wondering when you'd call." So she knew. She knew. "Then you know why I'm calling," I said. Another pause. "He told me you were unhappy," she said. "That your marriage was over." I laughed softly, but it wasn't amusement, it was disbelief. "He told you that, huh?" "I didn't mean for this to happen," she whispered. "He reached out first." Of course he did. David had always been the kind of man who needed to feel wanted, even if it meant destroying everything to get it. "I'm not calling to fight," I said finally. "I just wanted to hear your version of the story. So when I end this, I'll know exactly what I'm walking away from." She said nothing. Just a quiet exhale, then, "I think you already know." And she was right. I did. When I hung up, the house was silent again. But this time, it didn't feel empty. It felt ready. Because now, I wasn't the wife who didn't know. I was the woman who did, and who was finally deciding what to do about it. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. The house was still, the air heavy with that soft silence that comes before daylight. I made coffee, black, no sugar, and sat by the window, watching the first hint of gold spill across the street. That's when it hit me, I wasn't afraid anymore. For weeks, I'd been walking on eggshells around his moods, his lies, his phone. But now that I'd seen the truth, really seen it, something inside me went still. When the fear leaves, what's left is clarity. And clarity can be dangerous. I didn't confront him right away. That would have given him power, the chance to twist words, to act wounded, to say it's not what it looks like. No, I wanted him to feel what I had felt, uncertainty, confusion, the slow unraveling of trust. I wanted him to taste the silence that keeps you awake at night. So, I began to act. Small things at first. I stopped texting him during the day. Stopped asking where he was or when he'd be home. When he'd come back late, expecting questions, I'd just smile faintly and ask, "Hungry?" That calm scared him more than anger ever could. He started volunteering information I hadn't asked for. It was a late meeting. Traffic was bad. Tom wanted one more round of drinks. I just nodded. Okay. And each time I said it, I could see him growing more uneasy, like a man waiting for thunder after lightning. I also started dressing differently. Warmer colors, soft fabrics, little details I'd stopped caring about years ago. At first, it wasn't for him. It was for me. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't notice his reaction. One evening, I wore a crimson dress, simple, elegant, the kind I used to wear when we were dating. His eyes lingered, confusion flickering across his face. "Going somewhere?" he asked. "Dinner," I said, slipping on my earrings. "With who?" "Ethan." His expression faltered. "I didn't realize you two were still in touch." I met his gaze evenly. "Well, people change. Sometimes they miss what they used to have." I let the words hang in the air. He didn't respond, but the look on his face, that mix of jealousy and panic, was exactly what I'd been waiting for. Ethan and I didn't cross any lines. We talked, we laughed, we remembered the easy parts of who we used to be. When I came home, I found David sitting in the living room, the TV on but his attention elsewhere. "How was dinner?" he asked, his tone deceptively casual. "Lovely," I said, setting my purse down. We talked about old times. You know, nostalgia. The irony didn't escape him. His jaw tightened, his eyes darted toward me, then away. "That's nice," he muttered. I smiled. It really was. Over the next few days, the dynamic shifted. He became restless, suspicious. Checking my phone when he thought I wasn't looking, asking vague questions that sounded casual but weren't. I could feel him unraveling. He'd created a world of deceit, and now he didn't know which side of it I was standing on. That was my quiet revenge, not cruelty, not shouting, but dignity. The kind that makes a liar realize they've lost control. Then, one Saturday morning, he broke. He found me in the kitchen, scrolling through my phone, still wearing my robe. His voice was sharp when he spoke. "Are you seeing him again?" I looked up slowly. "Ethan?" "Yes, Ethan." I took a sip of my coffee. "Why?" "Because you've been different," he said, pacing slightly. "You've been distant. Secretive." I set the cup down carefully. "Funny. You didn't seem to mind secrets when they were yours." He froze. "What's that supposed to mean?" he asked, though his voice had already gone defensive. I met his eyes, calm and steady. "I know about her, David." His shoulders slumped. The fight drained out of him in an instant. Don't bother lying," I said quietly. "I saw you. At her house." The silence that followed was thick. You could almost hear it breathing between us. He sank into a chair, his hands covering his face. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this." I almost laughed. "It never is." When he finally looked up, his eyes were red, desperate. "I thought we were done, Anna. You'd stopped caring. We were just surviving." "Maybe," I said softly. "But you never asked why. You just found comfort somewhere else." He shook his head. "I made a mistake." "Yes," I said. "Several." He leaned forward, reaching for my hand. I pulled it back. "You said you missed her," I continued, my voice trembling just enough to be human. "And I let it go. But then you made sure you could stop missing her by bringing her back. What were you planning, David? To have two homes? Two hearts?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Because in that moment, everything between us was laid bare, the lies, the longing, the quiet betrayals we'd both been part of. "I didn't sleep with him," I said finally. "Ethan. In case that's what you're wondering." He blinked, startled. "But I wanted you to think I did," I added. "Because I wanted you to feel what it's like to lose something slowly, not through anger, but through indifference." His voice broke. "You did this to hurt me?" "No," I said calmly. "I did this to understand you. And now I do." I stood up, my robe brushing against the chair as I moved past him. "You don't miss someone because they're gone, David. You miss them because you took them for granted while they were still there." He didn't follow me when I walked away. He just sat there, head in his hands, like a man realizing too late what he'd destroyed. I went upstairs, closed the bedroom door, and packed a small suitcase. Not because I wanted to leave forever, not yet. But because sometimes, distance is the only language a broken man understands. I stayed at Emma's for a few days. She didn't ask questions, just poured me tea and let me sit in silence. When I finally told her everything, she nodded slowly. "So what now?" I stared at the steam rising from the cup, curling like a question I wasn't ready to answer. "I don't know yet," I said. "But I do know this, I'm done being the one who waits for love to come back home." I didn't go home for 3 days. David texted. Called. Left voicemails that started calm, turned pleading, and ended hollow. I didn't respond to a single one. It's strange how quickly peace becomes addictive, the kind that comes from silence, not absence. For the first time in years, I could breathe without waiting for the next lie to arrive. On the 4th morning, I woke up to sunlight pouring across Emma's guest room. My phone buzzed, not a call, but a photo message. It was from Lena. Her face filled the frame, that same fake sweet smile she wore at every office party. Beneath it, a short message. "You should come get your husband before he starts crying in my driveway." My stomach twisted. I didn't respond, but I grabbed my bag and left. Not for him, for me. I needed to see this ending with my own eyes. When I pulled up to her house, David was sitting on the curb. His car door was open, keys dangling, shoulders slumped forward. He looked smaller somehow, like a man who'd finally run out of stories to tell. I parked across the street and stepped out quietly. He looked up, eyes swollen. "Anna." I didn't move closer. "You called me here?" He shook his head. "She did. I didn't know what else to do." Lena stood at the door, arms folded, watching like she was enjoying the show. "I told you," she said sharply, "I'm not your therapist. Go cry to your wife." Then she slammed the door. The sound echoed down the street. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then David whispered, "I lost everything." I tilted my head. "No, David. You threw it away." He looked up, his voice trembling. "I thought she loved me." A bitter laugh escaped my throat. "You thought wrong. You always do when it comes to love, you mistake attention for affection, guilt for care." He winced. "Anna, please. I know I can't fix this overnight, but I want to try. I'll do therapy, I'll come clean." I cut him off gently. "You already came clean, David. The stain's just permanent now." He stood, desperate, reaching toward me. "We can start over." I shook my head slowly. "Start over where?" "At the beginning, where you still had secrets? Or somewhere in the middle, where I stopped recognizing the man I married?" He didn't answer. His silence said everything. Then came the part one hadn't planned for, the part where truth starts to travel. By evening, the whispers had begun. Someone from his office, probably Lena herself, leaked screenshots. Her messages. His replies. Late-night calls. Miss you texts with heart emojis. The story spread fast. The kind of small-town gossip that turns private heartbreak into public spectacle. My phone filled with messages, sympathy, pity, curiosity disguised as concern. Emma read one out loud and shook her head. "You don't owe anyone your side of the story." "I know," I said quietly. "But I might tell it anyway." That night, I sat alone on the balcony, city lights stretching like scattered stars below. There's a special kind of calm that comes after humiliation, when there's nothing left to hide, nothing left to lose. I realized then, I wasn't broken anymore. I was bare. And bare is honest. Bare can rebuild. A week later, David showed up again, this time at my workplace. He waited by the parking lot, holding a single envelope. "Divorce papers?" I asked, without stopping. He hesitated. "No. A letter." I turned to face him. "You had years to say everything you wanted to say. Why write it now?" "Because I finally know what I lost," he said softly. "And I know I'll never get it back." There was something in his voice, not manipulation this time, but surrender. He handed me the envelope and walked away. I didn't open it right away. I tucked it into my purse and went back to work. That evening, when I finally tore it open, there was only one page. "Anna. You were right. I didn't miss you because you were gone. I missed you long before that, when you were still next to me, but I was too distracted to notice. I don't expect forgiveness. But if you ever remember me, I hope it's not as the man who broke you, but as the lesson that taught you how strong you really were. David." I read it once. Then again. Then I folded it neatly, slid it into a drawer, and let the silence have the final word. Weeks passed. The house was sold. The furniture divided. Names removed from joint accounts. It was like untangling a life thread by thread, until only solitude remained, soft, quiet, almost kind. And for the first time in years, I started to dream again. Not of him. Not of revenge. But of peace. One evening, I returned to the park where I used to meet him after work, before the lies, before the distance. Children laughed near the swings, couples strolled hand in hand, and the air smelled faintly of jasmine. I sat on our old bench, letting memory wash over me. I whispered, I forgive you. Not for him, but for myself. Because forgiveness isn't about letting someone back in. It's about letting yourself walk away without the weight of hate. When I got home, I opened my laptop and began to write. Not a letter. Not a message. A story. My story. The one about a woman who thought she was losing her husband, but was really finding herself. The one about betrayal that became clarity. Loss that became liberation. I titled it simply. When the fear left, I became free. And that was the moment I knew, I wasn't his story anymore. I was my own. It's been almost a year since that night on Lena's street. A year since the house went quiet, since I packed my last box, since David's voice became just another echo I stopped waiting to hear. And in that year, I've learned something I wish someone had told me long ago. That healing doesn't arrive all at once. It drips in slowly, like sunlight through a half-open curtain. I moved into a small apartment on the edge of town, not fancy, but mine. Every wall carries my touch, pale blue in the kitchen, soft linen curtains in the bedroom. There's a lemon tree on the balcony that I water every morning. It's the only thing I talk to before coffee. Sometimes I think it listens. The mornings are quiet now, and the quiet doesn't scare me anymore. I fill it with music, with the clatter of dishes, with my own humming. And sometimes, with silence, the good kind, the kind that feels like peace instead of punishment. I see Emma often. She says I look lighter these days. Maybe I do. The woman she knew a year ago carried guilt like an extra limb. Now, when I smile, it's not out of politeness, it's because I mean it. We still talk about what happens sometimes, late into the night, sipping tea on her porch. She'll shake her head and say, I still can't believe he told you he missed his ex. And I'll smile softly and reply, neither can I. But maybe that was the truth I needed to hear. Because that sentence, that cruel, careless sentence, set me free in a way I couldn't see then. It forced me to stop living for the version of us that only existed in my imagination. Work changed, too. I took a different job, part-time, less pay, but more time for myself. I started volunteering at a community center, helping women rebuild after loss, the kind of loss that doesn't always come with funerals, but hurts just the same. Some of them cry when they talk. Some can't yet. I understand both. Because I've been both. A few months ago, I ran into David again. It was at the grocery store, near the coffee aisle. He looked older, not just in the face, but in the eyes. He smiled, hesitant, as if seeking permission to exist in the same space. Anna, he said quietly. I turned, polite but distant. David. There was a pause. The air felt heavy with unspoken years. He reached for a jar of honey, the same brand I used to buy, and chuckled nervously. I still can't find one that tastes better than yours. I smiled faintly. That's because you never learned how to sweeten things yourself. His smile faltered, and for a second, I saw something, not regret, not sadness, but understanding. I heard about your writing, he said. You're sharing stories now? Yes, I replied. Real ones. He nodded. I'm glad. Then, almost in a whisper, you deserved better than me. And for the first time I didn't argue. Because he was right. I placed my basket on the counter, paid for my things, and walked away, no anger, no tears, no need for closure. Just peace. That night, I wrote again, about forgiveness, about how love sometimes fails not because people are evil, but because they're human. I wrote about how sometimes the person you trust most teaches you the hardest lesson. That self-respect is the first kind of love you should never give away. And when I read it back, I didn't see pain anymore. I saw growth. I saw me. The following spring, the lemon tree bloomed for the first time. Tiny white flowers, their scent soft and clean, drifting into my living room. I stood there, holding a mug of tea, feeling that same gentle ache in my chest, the one that no longer hurts, just remembers. I whispered to the tree, "We made it." And in that moment, I realized. You don't need someone else to say you're enough. You only need to stop waiting for someone to tell you so. I still believe in love. Not the desperate kind that begs to be chosen. But the quiet kind that shows up, stays kind, and never makes you doubt your worth. Maybe I'll find it again someday. Maybe I won't. Either way, I'll be fine. Because the woman who once stayed awake, counting the spaces between apologies, now sleeps peacefully, alone, but whole. I've learned that heartbreak doesn't destroy you. It reveals you. It strips away the noise until you meet the part of yourself that survived. And once you meet her, once you see the strength beneath the bruises, you'll never go back to being who you were before. Sometimes, when I tell this story to others, they ask, "Do you ever miss him?" And I smile. Because the truth is, I don't miss him. I miss the woman who believed love could fix everything. But then I remember. She grew into someone even stronger, someone who doesn't need fixing. You know, when I look back on everything, the lies, the heartbreak, the silence that followed, I don't see a tragedy anymore. I see a turning point. Because sometimes, life doesn't end when someone walks away. It begins. It begins in the moment you stop asking, "Why wasn't I enough for them?" And start whispering, "Why wasn't I enough for me?" That's when healing starts. Not with revenge, or forgiveness, or someone else's apology. But with truth. The kind that sits quietly inside you and says, "You deserved better all along." I learned that love can be beautiful, but it should never cost you your peace. That missing someone is not the same as belonging with them. And that sometimes, the best way to say "I love you" to yourself is to finally stop waiting for someone else to mean it first. So if you've ever been where I was, staring at the pieces of a love that once felt safe, I hope you remember this. You are not what someone failed to see in you. You are what you choose to see in yourself after they leave. And one day, I promise, the same quiet that once broke you will feel like freedom. Would you have done what I did? Would you have walked away, or stayed and tried to fix what was already gone? Tell me in the comments. And if my story reached your heart tonight, make sure to subscribe. Because sometimes, the stories that hurt the most are the ones that teach us how to love ourselves again.